Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, a man on a mission. Uh, my practice is to start with something interesting and small in the big, not the big picture. That's really my mission. And I want to start with something I was struck with in an article I read in the New York Times over the weekend about Nikki Haley's campaign. And the idea is that she's going to keep on campaigning. Um, through Super Tuesday or something, but definitely into the future. And it's into a future in which she's going to get defeated by a wide margin in her whole home state, which is never a good thing for to happen to a politician. So the question really arises: why is she still running? I think I understand some of why she's still running, but the article didn't say anything about why she was running. It it didn't say anything about whether she had any chance of becoming the Republican nominee. I mean, if unless Trump drops dead, he's going to be the nominee. I mean, that's clear as can be. And if he did drop dead, I don't think that this Trump base would turn to Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley is taking her candidacy into a new phase where she's damaging to Trump. I mean, the Republican candidates supposedly were challenging Donald Trump, except for DeSantis at the beginning. They were no challenge, and they weren't challenging Trump either. They were careful not to offend him. But Nikki Haley chose, after New Hampshire, that she was going to offend him, and he was offended. I mean, he wasn't reasonable in thinking that she should give up after New Hampshire, but I mean, it was clear that she wasn't going to. The polls in South Carolina would have her behind by 30. So it's not like her own home population is rallying to her. And in conventions of old, there was the phenomenon of the state's favorite son. Of course, they were all sons and not daughters, but states used to do a lot to honor the most prominent politician among them. And sometimes in the first round in a convention, the state would cast its votes for its favorite son, so-and-so. So Nikki Haley has chosen nonetheless. She could have bowed out after New Hampshire. The future was clear enough. People had thought that maybe she would look stronger than she did, ended up looking in New Hampshire, but she didn't. Why does she decide to continue? And this is how I see it. It wasn't in the article, but and I think the reason it's not in the article is that Haley's reasons for running are reasons that she cannot speak. Would be just as glad to let the New York Times talk about her campaign as if the question of why is she doing this when she has no chance of getting the nomination. I mean, if Trump did drop dead, she's already gone more over and toward being a Liz Cheney to the people who would be delegates at the convention, then would turn to her to replace Trump. So, um, I do wonder. So why is she doing this? Well, when in the immediate aftermath of the insurrection and the Trump presidency, I don't remember what it was that Nikki Haley said, but um, she said a few things that she was Trump's person. She was in the Trump circle. He had appointed her U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Not a nothing post. So she was one of Trump's people, but then in the wake of everything that happened, she said a few things that Trump didn't like. I don't remember exactly what she said, but she, like other Republicans, got more into line when it turned out that Trump was still the master of the Republican base. So nobody but Chris Christie was in that campaign to tell the truth about Trump. And Nikki Haley was among those who was not into telling the truth about Donald Trump. But she's moved in the direction of telling the truth about Donald Trump. I'd like to think that this is a sign of the limits to her being an opportunist, which she was. When she went from the things that she said about Trump, which I don't remember, to being another Trump sycophant, even as she presumably was challenging him for the nomination. But I'd like to think that she realizes that she's being the last person standing. And having understood back then that Trump was what he is, however it is that she sees it, but she's exposed him in various ways. Not in ways that reflect on all kinds of things wrong with the Republican Party, but she's exposing some unattractive things about Trump and belittling incompetences that he's showing and things like that. I see her as having seen herself as playing the role of the hero, which is she was handed an opportunity. She knew what the truth was, and she did not want her Republican Party to become a mere extension of this guy. So she was willing to maybe sacrifice herself for the purpose of helping the Republican Party become less grotesque in the future than it is now. Because Donald Trump's influence makes this Republican Party, I mean, it's been a pretty sorry party for a good while, but Trump makes it more grotesque. Trump makes the Republican Party an ally of Putin to the detriment of Ukraine. The Republican Party would not have blocked aid to Ukraine unless it was the Trump Party, particularly, I think. And I think Nikki Haley wouldn't have been appointed as secretary to our ambassador to the United Nations if she didn't care about how the world was, I'm guessing. I mean, I don't much like Nikki Haley's politics, but to be a successful Republican in South Carolina, you either got to be somewhat crazy, or you got to be willing to cater to a somewhat crazy, because the political party that you're seeking power through um, has become under the sway of something crazy. So I like to think that there's something heroic going on there, that she understands that what Trump has done to her party is not okay. And she's in a position to weaken him. She can't destroy him. Who knows how many votes that might go one way if she didn't play this role, might go the other way because she played this role. But all anybody can do is play out the hand that they're dealt. And I think she's done a fine job of taking a position and continuing, planning to continue, and being willing to be humiliated in her own state in order to continue. And then I wonder, is she thinking that maybe in the long term, this is the best, this is a way to make a name for herself for some future time in some future Republican Party. I mean, I don't know how old she is. I think she's in her 50s. I don't know how long it's going to be before there might be a Republican Party who will look to somebody who played this role and say, yeah, she was on the good side. You know, like in France after the war, the people who had been in the resistance were the heroes, not the people who were in cahoots with the Nazis in administrating an occupied country. I don't know how, but I don't know if she's thinking that way. But you know, either way, um, I appreciate that Nikki Haley has chosen saw an opportunity and has seized it. The New York Times indicates that she's going to be running in a lot of states for some weeks to come. I don't think it's like all the way to convention or anything like that. But I think that she doesn't say, this is what I'm doing, because she wants to hurt Trump, but she doesn't want to do it in a way that calls attention to the way in which she's acting contrary to the interests of the as they perceive it in the Republican base. They want Trump. They don't want him damaged. So she's taking advantage of being entitled to run for the nomination like people do. I mean, there's an ethic where it's not a crime to be running for the nomination until the issue is decided. She's using that to pretend to be a normal candidate, but she's not a normal candidate. I suppose there are a lot of candidates that aren't normal candidates. Maybe they're just running. They know they're not going to get the nomination, but they're not trying to hurt the nominee, at least in the past. But, you know, this is somebody running in order to prepare the way to being mentioned and talked about and, you know, seen as somebody who might run. In 1968, I had my only seeing Ronald Reagan in the flesh. I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, because I was working full time for the McCarthy campaign, running for the Democratic nomination to stop the war in Vietnam. Anyway, there's an opportunity that Nikki Haley has to show, to accomplish something that might help the anti-Trump forces come November. And maybe so great will be the defeat of this really ugly thing that the Republicans will be uh, putting forward to the nation. And I think that there's a chance that there's a political future for the person who does that. I'm glad that she saw this opportunity. I would like to see more from Liz Cheney. I had thought earlier that she had conveyed subtly that as the Republicans had their campaign, she would be part of the picture running against Trump. And she, she had started doing that, but she hasn't been out there the way I thought she was going to be. And I wonder, is that a matter of Nikki Haley has sort of stepped into that role? Well, I think that has happened, but I don't see that. I don't see that as a reason why we shouldn't get Liz Cheney doing everything that she can. She's done a lot. She has played a very heroic role, and I think her place in history will be a whole lot more about the integrity that she showed and how rare that was in the Republican Party than it will be about her being so conservative as she has always been. She she gave up her power, number three in the Republican House, um, to honor her oath of office. What's remarkable is how remarkably rare that was in the Republican Party. What was it, 10 Republicans out of 200 and a couple? Yeah, such a this party is really it's something quite extraordinary. Yeah, we need more heroics in the Republican Party. I've been, you know, I've appreciated some people in the Republican Party who have spoken up here or there, like Mitt Romney. He voted for impeachment the first time, the only Republican who did. And he said some splendid things in his statement accompanying his book or explaining his book. But, as far as I'm concerned, he could have done a whole lot more. I mean, he's a man with some standing. The Republican Party nominated him for president in 2012. John McCain is dead. Romney is a respectable figure for a Republican. I mean, nobody, stands as taller in a way in America than as a Republican than Romney, considering what the Trump force represents. He could have been a whole lot more powerful. I admired that Chris Christie stepped up. I wondered a little bit about his motivation. I mean, he had a couple of motivations. And one of them was personal, a kind of, there's a vengeful feeling that I think people observed in it. And people attributed that to the fact that, in a sense, Trump almost killed him. Something about how Trump dealt with COVID, and then something about how, because of that, Christie got COVID. Trump's fault in a way, and it almost killed Chris Christie. And people, talk about that as a possible motive. I like to think that there's something in Chris Christie that's a bit on the righteous and respectable side. That's also motivating him to call out Donald Trump. That if he didn't know that Donald Trump was somebody that shouldn't be president and didn't care at all about that, he wouldn't have done what he did. That's my reading. Again, and I don't think Chris Christie, does he have any political future? Will New Jersey ever turn to him again? I don't know. I kind of think, I haven't thought that he had any future, but I do appreciate what he did as a candidate. I actually thought that he was going to be more capable. I saw some good footage of him, but I thought there was more that could be done, and he's kind of gifted at the prosecution game. He's very plain talking. I mean, you can. He's credible, and anyway, I just thought that he could do more, and I hope that other Republicans will step up. And as far as Liz Cheney's concerned, I don't see any reason why, just because Nikki Haley's out there doing a job, she can't do her own. And I saw, and I was glad to see that Liz Cheney, who I haven't heard from about Trump for a long time. I haven't heard from her. Maybe I missed something. Anyway, I did see that she had denounced Trump around this NATO issue. I think she was claiming, she was describing the terrible thing that Trump said about NATO as being unconstitutional. And I think that I would know how to make that case. I mean, that isn't the aspect of it. The fact that it would be illegal for him to do what he said he would do about abandoning our NATO allies, because we have a legally binding treaty agreement to do so. More important to me than that it would be illegal is that there's something really ugly about siding with the dictator, the aggressor, the fascist, the killer, the murderer, the kleptocrat, the ugly thing that is at Vladimir Putin and what he has done to his country. So NATO is something we are constitutionally bound to honor our commitment to, and our lawless Trump guy. But it's despicable also to side with somebody who does what Putin does, and against the protection of a valiant people that are trying to preserve their autonomy and do it as a democratic society. Is what we as Americans have always believed in. I wonder if how much that motivates Nikki Haley. I do know that one of the things that Liz Cheney has been emphasizing with her occasional remarks, it's from her that I've got the phrase that I've been using in my writings: the Putin wing of the Republican Party. Trump is, the buddies of Putin. And it seems like the Trump side of the party seems to be drawn to Putin and is willing to protect Putin by blocking what is obviously in the American national interest to get to Ukraine. Here we get back to why can't these people see what's obvious? I mean, it's obvious that Putin is America's greatest enemy. He combines being a big nuclear superpower with being kind of aggressive against us and our values. I mean, he's obviously. I mean, the Chinese are challenging us too. I mean, that's. But there's a way in which, if you look at the ways in which the Chinese have challenged us, you look at the ways in which Putin has challenged us. Putin is far more aggressive against us. So it's just obvious that when Trump and these Republicans in the House block our sending aid to Putin, to the Ukrainians, to fight Putin, that they are allied with the fascists against the democracies. How can it not be clear? Ukraine, people that I respect and I think have deep understanding of what's going on in the world in terms of great power politics, and in a sense, the nature of the threat that Putin's Russia obviously poses to the peace of the world. I mean, he took a peaceful Europe and has made it into something different. That's what fascists do. That's what Hitler did. 1939, he invaded Poland. That's what fascists do. You know, the United States has got a patchy moral picture. No society that's ever been a great power has got a unpatchy moral picture. People do what they can a lot. But we've also had a belief in certain values. And the values of fascism are contrary to the values on which this America that we've always been proud of is based. Whether we live up to liberty and justice for all, that's what we believe in. And it's the opposite of what fascism does. It's tyranny instead of liberty, and instead of justice, it is the few dominate the many. The opposite of justice is what the Athenians said was the principle of governing the world. Back when the Athenians wanted to be able to use the other people's island as a base for their operations against Sparta. He says, you know as well as we do that in the human world, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Our society is based on the idea that power is controlled by the way in which the people all exercise it into their common benefit through a democratic process. The fascist world is one where the power is not answerable to the people. The power goes to whoever it is that's able to seize it. I mean, it's true that Hitler got elected, sort of. He wasn't elected to be der Fuhrer. So he got elected, and then he used what he got from there, thanks to this old man, Hindenburg, who I don't know what, something happened between those two guys. But anyway, he parlays his legitimate role as chancellor into seizing more power, declaring whatever it was he declared, and ruling with the last election. Some people fear that this election in 2024 might be the last election. I don't know. I don't know how much I fear that, but I can see how that could happen. I'm optimistic about that Americans going to the polls in 2024 are going to repudiate fascism. My reading of the basic orientation of the American people with respect to the various things that are going on that actually are aspects of this confrontation between the power of the Trump power and the other power that's going against them, whether it's the electoral power of Joe Biden or the American system of justice or whatever. A battle between the rule of law and dictatorial fascist power to basically a profoundly criminal man. Hitler was criminal. A lot of leaders have been criminal. The human lot has been that most people in most situations in the history of the world have been subject to the power of people who did things that by American values would be regarded as criminal. We should infer something about the nature of the social regime of medieval Europe, that when you go into some of these old castles, you'll find rooms and instruments for torture next to the dungeon. I doubt that if we knew what went on there and for what reasons, we would approve. Fascism is the modern version of what civilization has from the beginning tended to put up there, whether it's the pharaoh or the emperor or whatever you see in the early full-blown civilizations 5,000 years ago or whenever in the various places it arose. There's always these figures that are operating regimes that are very top-down, so top-down that a huge chunk of people of these early full-blown civilizations were actually free people to live their lives. They were in some ways under compulsion and maybe fully enslaved. I don't have the numbers, but I did study this stuff. That book back there, The Parable of the Tribes, I really made the problem of power and social evolution. I really made an effort to see what had happened in the course of the history of civilizations. I made an effort. Never. There's a lot I don't know, but I researched until I felt like I knew enough to be able to speak responsibly about some things, and that my dad, who had died, looking over my shoulder, wouldn't have disapproved of my drawing the conclusions that I drew and expressing those conclusions as I did. Civilization is not what we have imagined it to be. There's a point in the we should look at ourselves in an evolutionary perspective. That I think is key. And if we do, we see that follow from the very beginnings of life, 3.5, 3.7, whatever it's going to be, these self-replicating things and these emerging systems and the multicellular organisms in the last billion years, the whole thing that we can see unfolding into the rise of the dinosaurs and the coming of the asteroid, and then the mammals finding ways to fill those niches all the way up to 10 or 12,000 years ago. That whole thing is a biological evolutionary process, all operating according to the same basic principles of a process of selection operating and differentiating non-randomly between the various options and determining which kinds of things would get their DNA into the future. That was how life was for everything and everybody. Uh, and up to 10 or 12,000 years ago, at which point, by the way, we were already fully human. They were hunter gatherers and they were living basically continuously, meaning not that, they never died. I mean, how they were living was in some fundamental ways just an extension of our pre-human, primate past. That being hunter-gatherers was sort of, something we had in common with the chimpanzees from whom we split 6 or 7 million years ago. They were cultural, and that was no small thing, but like fire and language and paintings and all kinds of, probably they were fully human, so they probably were creating very rich cultures. Maybe each band or regionally, I don't know how they were distributed. I think of it more as isolation than as clusters of hunting-gathering bands that influence each other, but I don't really have a firm grasp of the density. I do know that hunter-gatherers spread throughout the whole world before we were beginning to be civilized. That we were everywhere pretty much before we stepped across that threshold. And then we took an unprecedented step. And I claim that we haven't looked at the huge implications of taking an unprecedented step. And I don't understand why we haven't looked at that as a bigger deal. I do have a video where I conjecture a little bit, but I'm not too impressed. But I don't get it. But what happens is that the path of civilization involves a creature inventing its own way of life. Hunter-gatherers were still in the same way of life with respect to size, structure, mode of subsistence. They were still, not unlike the chimpanzees, basically. But then they start to invent their own way of life because they've got this capacity that no creature on Earth had previously had. And I do think that there was a kind of necessity, at least that's what I argue in the Parable of Tribes. There's some evidence that that hunter-gatherers, I think I have a passage, either I'm quoting or it was me, hunter-gatherers did not go from there to agriculture or to horticulture to a greater good, but that they felt compelled to go to find ways of making the same amount of territory yield more food. And I've not put this aspect of things forward since I wrote that book, and that came out in '84. But there is a book called the Food Crisis in Prehistory by a guy from Yale that influenced me about this. And the idea was that I think that people were having trouble getting enough food as hunter-gatherers, and part of it had to do with or maybe it was something I added to the picture, was that had to do with our having spread across the world, that maybe the fact that we'd gone all the way from Tierra del Fuego down in South America, over, and even in Oceania, that we had really spread, and down into Australia 50,000 years ago, that at a certain point we didn't have any place further to retreat, but clearly there was something that caused people to migrate, and it looked like we wanted to space ourselves out. This is my conjecture. I don't remember if anybody ever said anything like this. But then once you've essentially filled the earth on those terms, there get to be a food crisis like this guy Cohen from Yale described based on the anthropological, archaeological evidence. And there is evidence that as people became more civilized, their diet got a lot worse. Um, you can see in their bones that they are not as well nourished as hunter gatherers. Let me just say, I'm almost certain I know that, but there is that moment when we do something unprecedented, puts us into a situation which is never existed between different forms of life. Or if it did, it was because of something that life didn't control, like continents coming together and threw things together. That kind of disorder. See, the evolution creates a situation in which all the elements of the system work together in some fundamental way to produce a perpetual motion machine, which, when fueled by energy from the sun, will just keep on going. Even as you've got all this other stuff happening within the system where the interests of the various actors conflict, like predators and prey and parasites and hosts. But the total picture is always going to be what's selected for is a kind of order in which the interaction among the actors is regulated in a way that serves the cause of perpetuating the living system. That's what gets selected for. Nobody is running the show, at least as far as science knows. It's not like, oh, they have the purpose of creating this synergistic, viable thing on this planet. It just happens, at least that's as far as I know, and I don't know how far that is. But I follow what science tells me, and what science tells me is that we have to start someplace, and you can start with cosmic evolution, and in the Big Bang, and we kind of know a lot about how things will unfold from there. And you end up after billions of years with these amino acids, and you end up with stars getting formed like our sun, and disks going around the thing that eventually congeal into this planetary system, and all that. And then gradually on this planet you get something that self-replicates, just because maybe we got seeded by some of these organic models, or maybe they just emerge out. There are lots of conjectures about how life emerges, but once it emerges, inevitably it's going to be to go through that Darwinian process. And I think that Darwin's idea is just so elegant and powerful and illuminating. And whether there's anything that set any of this in motion with any kind of intent, I just don't know. But I don't put that into my picture of things. But I do see that would happen if under the right conditions, that this planet is covered with an extraordinary living system consisting of I've seen different kind of numbers, but I think that if you count everything, millions of species. And I think they think that we all have a common ancestor. I've never quite grasped why that would, but anyway, a lot of us have a very common ancestor in any event. And it just has developed in this extraordinary way. And unless something interfered with it from the outside, what went on for 3.5 billion years would have just kept on going on. My phrase is the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. And then you get this process of selection, which is producing this brain. And evolution doesn't look forward, according to the scientific understanding. It just it selects based on the competition, et cetera, to see what survives. That's all. So we come to a point where a creature emerges out of that system because it turned out that being smart was good for surviving as hunting gatherers. Our ancestors made it. They got better at making tools, et cetera, et cetera. You might look at a video I did about culture, the cumulative nature of culture. We had a head that had the capacity to break out of the system. And evolution wasn't planning on that. We were successful as hunter-gatherers, and it turned out that the way we were successful, which is to become cultural animals, led to a situation where we were able to do something nothing had ever done before, which was invent our own way of life. And then in terms of size and structure and means of subsistence, everything would be different. Not very far along from the beginnings of horticulture and herding. You find things that are really quite different. It's not like adding a garden to what had been a hunting-gathering way of life. Now it was a whole different way of life. And eventually agriculture emerges. And this happened in a whole lot of places, a half dozen places. It happened, and it ran very parallel directions. And it did so because there was a selective process that would inevitably emerge. If you have all these things exist, the civilized societies that are a new life form, the first ones that are not the product of natural selection, but are created by the creative imagination of a creature. If you have them in a situation where there's nothing to regulate their interactions, and that's how civilization would inevitably emerge, you've got anarchy. You've got anarchy among things that are being run by the consciousness of the creatures and not preordained by natural selection. So there are all these cultural options, and you're going to end up with a war of all against all. And it will not be random which ones survive in a war of all against all. And those things that can prevail inevitably in such a war will be non-random, just like in the Darwinian process. But this is all of a sudden disorder. Those things that can prevail will be the ones that could survive and spread, and all the other options of different ways that human culture might blossom, they're precluded by the fact that they will not be able to prevail in a war of all against all. And I've previously done with that parable of the tribes how the outcome, if we got one that's sort of inflamed with the spirit of the gangster, let's say, it shows how the spirit of the gangster eventually pervades the whole system, and there's no way out because power is not controlled. Anarchy makes it inevitable that the ways of power will be selected for. And by power, I mean that which makes it possible to prevail in a war of all against all, which anarchy inevitably will cause. And anarchy is the inevitable consequence of a creature's breaking out of the evolved order of life into a whole kind of new disorder, which the only way civilization can emerge is into disorder. And the consequence of the disorder is inevitably that the spirit of the gangster will have a disproportionate say in how that creature's civilization will develop. And that's why I claim in that book, but in various shorter ways on my website, A Better Human Nature, A Better Human Story, I claim to show that we are better creatures than we thought ourselves to be. And that that is what we derive from what I claim to show, which is that the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. It is the consequence of an inevitable social evolutionary process, such that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that might make, as we did here on the Earth 10,000 years ago, might make the breakthrough into inventing its own way of life onto the path of civilization, will find itself plummeting into an anarchy with enormous and unfortunate social evolutionary consequences. The selection for the ways of power includes the selection for a lot of things that are not what we human beings would choose. You know, I've been working on that kind of idea for half a century plus. And I always am looking for ways of getting people to open their minds to seeing that might actually be true. One thing I've sometimes played with is an exercise that I premise on something which I confess is my conjecture. I don't know. I mean, I do have 77 years plus of experience of being part of the human world. So I have some evidence, but I don't really know exactly all this. But this is what I believe, that if we went around and asked people, which would you rather live in, a world that's at war or a world that's at peace? Which would you rather live in? A world in which there was justice, or a world in which there is pervasive injustice? And so on, with other dichotomies, love and hate, and kindness and cruelty. I mean, we could make a lot of dichotomies. And which would you like of these along this spectrum? Where would you like for human society to be? I believe we would overwhelmingly get people choosing the better of all those dichotomies. Do you disagree? Well, anyway, that's what I believe. But anyway, that's the given here. And if that is true, then the question might arise, why is the world around us so different from the one that, according to my conjecture, the great majority of human beings would prefer? More just, more peaceful, more loving, more kind, and all the other virtues that you can imagine. Well, I think that there are various pieces of the answer that one might consider for the question: why don't we have a world that corresponds more fully? Why is there so much that's broken when we all would choose to live in a world that's more whole? Well, one possibility is it ain't easy to design a human world of civilization that achieves all one's purposes. I mean, there are so often unforeseen consequences. Um, we don't fully know what the results of what we're going to, what we're planning to do, what the results are going to be. Um, and so it's, and we have such freedom of movement, apparently, that we can make all kinds of mistakes um, as we try to create a world in which people are loving, say. If there were no destructive forces at work, how well would we be able to succeed in creating a world that was, loving? Well, I actually believe that we would be pretty successful, but people are difficult, and maybe I'm fooling myself. But broken people are especially difficult. I mean, you can see how people's brokenness feeds into what undercuts the lovingness of their bonds. This social evolutionary force that inevitably emerges when a creature takes a step onto the path of civilization, which is inevitably the path of anarchy. That opens the way for a whole new way of understanding why the human world is the way it is. It was inevitable that out of this anarchy, a selective process would drive the evolution of civilization in some fundamentally destructive ways. There would be a force of brokenness unleashed into the world. Now, in a way, that's as far as I went in the 14 years between my seeing what I saw and my publishing that book. But over the years, I've looked further at that force that social evolutionary force, the selection for the ways of power, the way it gets unleashed inevitably into the human system. And I've discovered that there is a coherent force that emerges inevitably in that civilizational system, where one form of brokenness is continually giving rise to another form of brokenness. And if you look at the system over time, you can see that this is a coherent force that's moving through the human world with trauma resulting from war, and then the traumatized people's brokenness ramifying into the world in the various ways in which it does. And in each case, always being able to see that each form of brokenness is the result of other forms of brokenness that preceded it and caused it. And that each form of brokenness in itself changes how the world evolves in some ways, but invariably in the direction of spreading brokenness in shape-shifting ways. So in a way, that was my first big idea. And then I explored another idea in the book that my head is hiding called Out of Weakness, Healing the Wounds to Drive Us to War, which looked at the ramifications of that war of all against all. That people have been traumatized for from the very beginnings. If war is going to be an inevitable part of a society, and also if the spirit of the gangster is going to get a disproportionate say in how those civilizations develop, that means a lot of trauma for the human beings living within it. That's what Out of Weakness is about. It's about how trauma in the human world has given us certain psychological structures that actually feed the brokenness of the world. They drive us to make war as one of the central things there, but it's more multidimensional than that. I mean, if you look at, for example, at, what is it that goes into making today's Republican base and the various forms of brokenness it represents, you can see that they're all forms of American brokenness that are fed into them. Brokenness begets brokenness. It really, I mean, the results of things are off, multidimensional, but basically what brokenness does beget is brokenness. And wholeness, thankfully, also begets wholeness. Loving people do make the world better. Fair-minded people make the human world better. Generous people do make the human world better, even while greedy people and institutions like the fossil fuel industry and the tobacco industry and the asbestos industry, greedy people do make the world more broken. Brokenness begets brokenness. Wholeness begets wholeness. And once in a while in history, there come battles in which there emerges a pure actor that in itself represents a force of brokenness. I mean, most American political parties through history have been a force of brokenness and of wholeness, at the same time, a mixture, but not today's Republican Party. As I said, and maybe one of the blurry things, if you look at all the things the Republican Party does and says, and you ask, what are the consequences of this? How does this impact the way the world unfolds? And I think that invariably, the answer is at best it does no harm, but most of the time it makes the world more broken. It itself is a pure case. It's somewhat extraordinary that we should have such a thing in American society right now. I mean, I've studied a couple of other cases, pure cases of something that continually seems to be choosing the wrong side, the broken side. The Nazi example is an obvious case. Just about all the things they did made the world more broken. But the other one is the way the South operated, acted, spoke during the 1850s, and back a bit into the 40s for that matter. I mean, I've studied that era, and something pretty appalling, which to which that a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more broken really applies more than usual. And then, well, in the case of the Nazis, one can see the obvious destructive consequences, but there are also a lot of destructive causes. The almost 20 years from the beginnings of World War I to Hitler winning his election, that's 19 years. there are such huge national trauma uh, inflicted on the German people that if you look at how things unfolded over all those years, you can see uh, that openings were being created by those trauma for a force of brokenness like the Nazis. And you can also see that, there are aspects of German brokenness, like involving anti-Semitism and militarism that could be tapped. But the German people themselves were in such a broken state from all those historical traumas of the war that killed millions and the nature of the peace. I mean, it's really a terrible stretch of history for them. And then with the rise to power of a force of brokenness in the 1850s, it was, I think, headquartered in the South, but it also produced a dynamic so that by the 18, whatever that year was, that John Brown invaded and became a martyr, the South was aflame with something very broken from the 1850, Texas. There was something rising already in the South, but the North was basically like the Democrats of our era, basically trying to, appease and live with what was happening, but without giving away everything. And then as the 1850s wore on, the fire that was burning in the South spread to the North. And by the time that John Brown gets hanged, you've got people like Emerson and Thoreau making a national hero of him. He who had murdered people in Kansas in response to the murderousness of the Southern element. And if you read the whole thing about bloody Kansas and the behavior of the pro-slavery side, this is a force that was consistently broken. They were the ones who refused to accept that the balance of power was shifting in our constitutional democracy. That happens. They refused to accept the continuation of the basic peace that had been reached between slave and not slave and the various compromises. And then did some corrupt stuff trying to take over Kansas, such that a guy like John Brown would go there and kill people. And then people like Emerson would sort of compare his hanging to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. This was a country that had broken apart. I have in my that book back there, which is available as a free PDF on my website, a betterhumanstory.com. That's what's it called? What We're Up Against. And it talks about the spirit of the South and how it had gotten inflamed and how it sold its people a bill of goods so that the slave power was gathering an army to defend its lawless act of secession, to preserve the slave system, which it had dominated the early generations of the Republic, and was refusing to accept that sometimes you lose an election. And somebody like Abraham Lincoln, who doesn't want your empire to expand, the empire of slavery, is going to be president for 4 years. And if you don't like it, well, you stop splitting your vote. With you accept that sometimes you got to go with a Stephen Douglas instead of splitting the Democratic vote, which opens the way to Abraham Lincoln coming in. You play the game according to the rules. That's what the American uh, uh, the compact is. You play the game. When you lose, you lose. Not this gang. The brokenness extended to that. It was a precursor of Donald Trump. If you lose, you do not accept that that this thing that you ran against defeated you, and you are legitimately subject to its power so long as he legitimately occupies that office. The Southerners seceded. Trump just used his incomprehensible talent as a liar with his base to sell them the obvious falsehood that the election had been stolen from him. Brokenness begets brokenness. All the ways that Trump is broken. Whatever is broken in the Republican base that they can believe things like that. Here we are again at the politics of falsehood. It's interesting, all the lies that are basically, the Republicans are basically about lies. They're lying about race relations. They're lying about climate change. They're lying about Trump's crimes. They're lying about the election. They're lying about caring about America. It's not, Trump is not their retribution. Trump is their con man. He's fleecing them. He's conning them. He's in it only for himself. And then for some reason, they don't see it. And there we are back at that mystery that, you can see how preoccupied I am with it. Okay. So I may be back. I probably will be back. There is an integrated perspective on a lot of different levels of things that's available if you spend enough time with my videos and do a lot of putting it together in your own head. I don't know how reasonable that is to expect. Well, you can get it that way. But if you want to see whether there is a better human story that actually might equip us better to fight the battle over human destiny more effectively, and that is ultimately what I claim, what I believe. Please take a look at my website, abetterhumanstory.org. There are a lot of levels, the fundamental level being we got to understand what it means to become the civilization creating species. It really, understanding that really does change our understanding of a lot. And within that, we have to understand the place that we're at in the social evolutionary process, where what we do or don't do is going to determine what could be going either way, getting our act together to survive for the long haul on this planet as a going concern, or destroying ourselves. Either one looks like a real possibility. I was saying earlier that, I was imagining some people who do really care which way that goes, but don't know really what to do. And looking at that is a source of pain. And I understand that pain. I don't know when I might talk about the toll all this has taken on me. I've been looking at ugly stuff so much for so long. I used a line a couple of these episodes ago that my shock absorbers are shot. They are. It is painful to look at. But if you're wondering what is there that you can do, it might be a contribution in the direction of improving the odds in case if we get to some tipping point, it will weigh in the right direction. You can see that I am here because I believe that getting that way of thinking out there into the way our civilization thinks about how we got here, who we are, what we got to do in the coming generations, that if you think that that might be something that could help things along, I hope you'll go to my website and see whether I deliver the goods that are motivating me at this stage of my life to keep playing like a quarterback in the fourth quarter, down by 2 touchdowns, but determined to use the clock to maximal advantage. So please take a look. The American crisis is a layer of a bigger crisis. And one of the ways of being successful in managing the bigger crisis of two coherent forces battling over human destiny is to get this way of thinking out there better. Check it out. I'm like the Marines. I'm looking for a few good people. And also finding fulfillment to simply say what's inside me, which I'm trying to channel, with a completely clean and clear window, not editing myself to avoid risk and not hiding where I'm really coming from and what I really think. This is it. Thanks for listening.